Today I'm at St. Anne's Catholic Church here in Bartlett. It's a pretty big church. If you think about the Catholic Church, some people would say that it began with St. Peter, that he was the first pope. Most Baptists wouldn't believe that. We know for sure that the Catholic Church existed by 1054 because that's when it split from the Eastern Orthodox Church in the Great Schism. And in the 1,000 years since then, it has made it to every corner of the globe. Every country on the planet has some kind of Catholic presence. How did Catholics get to so many places with their understanding of Christianity? That's what we're going to be talking about in today's session. Hope you enjoy it. Today we're going to continue our look at historical models for developing strategy in missions and training leaders. We're going to be looking at what was happening in the Roman Catholic world. We're going to look from basically the end of the apostolic era until the 18th century. We're going to begin by looking at Gregory the Great. Gregory the Great is also known as Saint Gregory the Great or as Pope Gregory the Great, depending on your perspective. He served as Pope from 590 to 604 AD. Of course, there's a little bit of historical anachronism in calling him the Pope and saying that he represents the Roman Catholic Church. So let me just have a minute to explain that. It wasn't until the Great Schism, almost 500 years after his death, that there was an Orthodox Church and a Roman Catholic Church. And so there was just the church. And if you were a believer, you were a part of the church. And he happened to be the Bishop of Rome, which is later considered to be the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church after the Bishop of Rome separated from all of the other bishops. And so just with that in mind, understand when we talk about Roman Catholic strategy, the Roman Catholic Church as we know it today did not exist then. There was just the church. And so St. Gregory the Great or Gregory the Great is accepted as an influential leader in the Eastern Orthodox Church, in the Roman Catholic Church, also in the Anglican Church. He's considered to be a doctor of the church in each of these communities. He was born into a political family. His father was a Roman senator and was well educated and respected widely in his lifetime for his many writings. He made decisions as the Bishop of Rome, or later considered to be the Pope, that helped shape Roman Catholic Church for 900 years in terms of how they were organized, what their liturgy looked like, and their mission strategies. It was the last of these, of course, that most interests us in this course. And so let's take a moment to kind of explore some of the strategy that he contributed. During this period, the church grew largely through power encounters, this lifetime of Pope Gregory. While some of these encounters were of a spiritual nature, most usual form was military. And over the following centuries, many mass conversions led to the quote-unquote Christianization of Europe. The question remains how many came to faith in Jesus and how many entered into a political world known as Christendom. But Gregory had some fresh ideas for world evangelization that were more spiritual than political. So one of the things that he emphasized was the importance of monasticism. He employed monks to help expand the Roman Church throughout Europe. These monks were the church's real missionaries during the Middle Ages, and they would go into a new area. They would get permission from a local leader, a king or a chieftain, for permission to build a monastery. They would build temporary buildings for themselves, and they would go out and they would actually preach the kingdom to the surrounding villages. Once people began to respond, they would begin to establish permanent buildings and plant churches around the monastery. And then over time, as believers came into that monastery system, they would then be sent out to new areas and they would continue to leapfrog the expansion of the church through these monastic communities. There were several different types of monks. There were Hermetic monks, which were hermits. Those were the original monks, like St. Anthony. They would go out into the desert or up into a tree or into a cave. They would want to be by themselves and just have a life of contemplation. The Cenobitic monks were those who formed into communities and they would spend time together praying. Those developed into the monastic monks, which were highly organized monasteries, and they related to other monasteries and had a network like the Benedictines. And then later, there developed a whole system of mendicant monks. Those would be friars who traveled and preached. They were more itinerant and more missionary, like the Franciscans and the Dominicans. using this strategy also had a lot of impact on monarchs or rulers. Gregory emphasized that rulers needed to make their subjects accept baptism, so he still accepted that idea of using political influence in sharing the kingdom or expanding Christianity. But the monks and bishops would appeal to monarchs to make their subjects accept this baptism. When the king would become a Christian, he would just say, hey, everybody in my kingdom, here's what we do. We follow Christ. We today would say that's not acceptable, but in that time period, that is what all peoples did. Whatever the king did, everybody followed the king's lead. And that followed all the way through the Reformation, when we know that whatever the political ruler declared the country to be, oh, you're in England, you're an Anglican. Oh, you're in Germany, you're a Lutheran. Oh, you're going to be in Geneva, you're going to do whatever John Calvin says. So that was kind of the standard practice all the way until basically the American experiment with freedom of religion and separation of church and state. Another concept that Gregory introduced into missions was the idea of accommodation. Missionaries were instructed to accommodate the church to the local culture. Gregory instructed Augustine, not St. Augustine who wrote The City of God, but the St. Augustine who went to England, quote, "The heathen temples of these people need not be destroyed, only the idols which are to be found in them. If the temples are well built, it is a good idea to detach them for the worship of the true God. And since the people are accustomed, when they assemble for sacrifice, to kill many oxen in sacrifice to the devils, it seems reasonable to appoint a festival for the people by way of exchange." And through that concept that we see him explaining there, all over the world for about 1,000 years, that was the Catholic strategy of missions. Wherever the people were already gathered to worship, he said, just keep gathering there. Oh, they have a festival? We'll call it something else and say it's a Christian festival. And allow them to keep as much of their culture as possible and just put Jesus on top of that. The downside of that, what we have learned through history, is that by not introducing people to the true gospel, he opened the door for a lot of syncretism. It's important for us to learn that lesson as we consider the concept of contextualization, because all the new brains in missiology are saying, oh, just go in and let people keep their own culture and introduce Christ on the side. Need to look back at what happened when that was the Catholic Church's strategy and consider what are some of the inherent dangers. So that's a little bit about Gregory the Great. Next, I want us to consider Raymond Lull. Raymond Lull was born in Majorca in 1235. That's an island off the coast of Spain. He lived about the same time as St. Francis and had a similar life experience. He was raised wealthy and spent his life chasing women. As he shares his own testimony, he said he followed a beautiful woman into a church. He was riding on horseback pursuing her. As he continued to pursue her over time, eventually she opened her blouse to show her body had been ravaged by cancer, and he was rebuked for pursuing the temporal rather than the eternal. Through this and other mystical visions, Lull realized his need to dedicate his life to the Lord, and he became a Christian at the age of 30. After providing for his wife and children, he decided to become a Franciscan monk and dedicated his life to missions, particularly missions to the Muslims. He studied Arabic and Islam for 9 years and then started a school to train missionaries so that they would understand the Arabic language and also logical ways to refute the teachings of Islam. He made several attempts to share the gospel in North Africa, where he was finally captured, imprisoned, expelled, and eventually martyred in 1316. He developed a very significant strategy that was used for quite a while and is still followed in some places. He put a heavy emphasis on apologetics. He wrote books for Muslims and insisted missionaries should be able to answer all the Muslim arguments against Christianity. So he taught them a very logical presentation. He actually felt that if someone had the perfect, irrefutable argument for the truth of the gospel, anyone who heard it would be converted. He was very interested in training missionaries, not just sending them out, but saying that they needed to know language, culture, and the world religions that they were going to be encountering when they got to the field. He founded the Miramar College for this very purpose, one of the first schools designed specifically to train missionaries. He believed in preaching the word of God publicly. He made 3 trips to North Africa. He would stand in the marketplace and challenge people to follow Christ. And he thought that martyrdom could possibly be a door to open people to understand the passion and value of the gospel. He said all missionaries should be prepared to lay down their life for the sake of the gospel. Next, I want us to just consider briefly the Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus. They were founded by Ignatius Loyola, who lived from 1491 to 1569. The Society of Jesus and Ignatius of Loyola gave leadership to the Counter-Reformation. This was a call from within the Catholic Church to take the charges of Martin Luther seriously and to return to the true teachings of the Bible. Ignatius was recuperating from wounds. He had gotten in a military battle when he had a conversion experience and a call to a deeper discipleship. He developed a system for helping people grow in their personal relationship with Christ that is still used around the world. He also created an order of men and women committed to following and spreading the gospel. Stephen Neal has called the founding of the Jesuits perhaps the most important event in the missionary history of the Roman Catholic Church. His most famous follower and one of his closest friends was Francis Xavier, who lived from 1506 to 1552. He was called to spread the message of God rather suddenly when one of two missionaries to India fell ill the day before the ship was to leave. So he went to Goa in their place and developed the original mission strategy for the Jesuits. His strategy was to teach children who could then be led to reach their parents. He would have them memorize the Lord's Prayer and the Ten Commandments and then bring that message home. After a brief stay in Goa, he moved on to South India, and after 2 years, he had seen about 100 converts. Then he followed the trade routes of his day and went on to Japan. 50 years after his death, it is estimated that there were 300,000 professing Christians in Japan. Those Christians could see China across the sea, and so the archbishop serving there in Japan used to look across over to the Chinese coast and pray, "Rock, rock, when wilt thou open, rock?" And so that's where we hear from Matteo Ricci. Matteo Ricci was born the same year that Francis Xavier died, 1552, and he lived until 1610. He was also from a wealthy family. He was sent to Rome to study in preparation for a career in law, but came under the influence of Jesuit teachers and soon felt a call to career in missions. He saw training in mathematics rather than a religion degree as a door to service. And after a few years in Goa, he made his way to China, where he attracted the interest of scholars with all of his mechanical gadgets, clocks, navigational devices, musical instruments, and so forth. In order to continue building relationships, he began to accommodate, following that principle of accommodation, to the Chinese lifestyle in terms of dress, language, and focused on reaching into the higher social classes. He taught that Confucianism was a philosophy, not a religion, and therefore was not in opposition to Christianity. One could be a faithful Christian and a faithful Confucianist. This brought him into conflict with other Catholics who had a view of tabula rasa, which means more or less clean slate, or all prior learning needed to be replaced with Christianity and Western civilization. We see those two poles continuing today, as I say, between contextualization and a quote-unquote pure Christianity, which probably isn't really a pure Christianity. It's contextualized to my culture instead of their culture. That's a whole discussion we need to continue to have as we consider strategy and missions and learning from history is what do we bring from our culture, what do we accept from their culture, and how do we make sure that everything we do is based on what the Bible actually teaches. So anyway, because of this controversy in his own life and ministry, he was curtailed. Some of his writings remained in circulation and were even picked up and distributed by Protestant missionaries who arrived in China some 200 years later. Because of these challenges in terms of contextualization, some of the things that the Jesuits were doing, also some political insider training, the Jesuits were disbanded in 1773. They were later restored in 1815. Most historians think they were disbanded because of the economics, as the nation-states of Europe were trying to shake off the power of the Catholic Church. But whatever the cause, the move had a disastrous effect on Catholic mission efforts. No other missionary order was prepared to take over their work when 3,000 Jesuit missionaries were forced to leave the field, and it all collapsed. As the church was trying to restore its position in Europe after the Napoleonic Wars, it recognized that it needed the strength and structure of the Jesuits, and so they brought them out of hiding and put them back in place, but it was too little too late, and they never recovered the influence that they had prior to the disbanding of the Jesuits. The last aspect of Roman Catholic strategy I want us to consider is colonialization. In the 16th and 17th century, Spain and Portugal aggressively explored and conquered much of Africa and the Americas. Catholic rulers sent Catholic missionaries along with all of the political expeditions. They demanded obedience to the Pope. They sincerely wanted the conquered to be converted, but they were conquered and told to convert rather than being won through clear gospel presentation. Many of them saw Catholicism as a means of pacification. The Catholic friars made some converts by force and some by persuasion, but the discipling of the native peoples was hindered by the lack of priests, and the Roman Catholic Church refused to educate or ordain Indians for the priesthood. So most Latin Americans are Catholic today, but they don't always have a pure understanding of what the gospel is, of what the Bible teaches. And as I said, there is a lot of syncretism If you've taken world religions, you've probably studied some about Santeria and Voodoo, and these are just a couple of the examples of what happened when they came in and told people they were Catholic, but did not teach them what the Bible had to say about what it means to follow Jesus Christ. Again, that's a great warning for us as we go out. If we get excited about evangelism, but we don't consider how to follow that up with discipleship and church planting and leadership training and empowering national leaders who understand evangelism, discipleship, and church planting, we're going to end up with syncretism and a lot of problems. So as I say, the reason we're looking at this history, in case you're wondering, hey, this isn't a history of class, it's a strategy class. There are things that we can learn from our forefathers and foremothers, and we need to be careful not to just dismiss it, but to consider how is what they're doing similar to what we're doing? What were the consequences? And are there warnings for me so that I don't make a mistake as I put my strategy together? Tomorrow we're going to look at the beginnings of Protestant mission outreach. Hopefully that will also be helpful. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to give me a call, drop me a line, stop by the office. Well, hopefully, as you have heard how the Catholic missionaries traveled around the world and spread their understanding of Christianity, you've gotten some ideas. There are certain things that we would want to copy, and of course certain things that we would want to avoid. That's going to be true of all of the things that we look at. Remember that we're not studying strategy to copy, but we're always evaluating what we're learning. Hopefully you're able to evaluate the things that we've talked about in today's lesson. God bless.